Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents, to Brothers of the Serpent podcast, coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science, nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed high atop the Edwards Plateau. This is episode 60, 666666666.
Whoa.
Yeah, been waiting a long time for this
Freak me
episode.
out, man. My hair's standing up.
Episode 66. And as always, we are joined by our good friend and longhead, Mr. Brett England, from way out in space and is deep beneath it, whatever it is. How you doing out there, buddy?
What's your
Doing well,
six?
guys, doing well. Glad to be here. Excited to see what we come up with tonight.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about, I don't even know what to call it. Ice and aliens, I guess. And Nazis. And, I don't know. All right, so before we get into that, though, we have, as always, space weather news. The solar wind has arrived. Earth is entering a stream of solar wind flowing from a hole in the sun's atmosphere. Ekravas! It is not a very fast stream, but at this time of year, it could be enough to ignite Arctic auroras. Equinox cracks in Earth's magnetic field are lowering our planet's defenses against the solar wind, setting the stage for northern lights. And also, gigantic jets in the Caribbean. Last Saturday, September 15th, Tropical Storm Isaac dissipated in the Caribbean. Just before the storm died, it fired off a barrage of gigantic jets. That's capitalized. Capital G, capital J. Gigantic jets are related to sprites, strange forms of upward-directed lightning that shoot out of highly charged storm systems. Think of gigantic jets as sprites on steroids, much more powerful and rare than sprites. Before 2017, gigantic jet sightings numbered in the dozens only. Tropical Storm Isaac produced at least 8 gigantic jets in a single night. The storm may have been decaying, but it was still a prolific source of upward-directed lightning. The last time I saw so many gigantic jets in a single night was back in 2017 when Tropical Storm Harvey passed Puerto Rico. Gigantic jet activity could be intensifying. Some researchers believe that cosmic rays help charge up the storm systems, setting the stage for outbursts of lightning. In recent years, space weather balloons, which are not UFOs, have observed a steady increase in cosmic rays. This is largely due to a decline in the solar cycle. Flagging solar wind pressure and weakening sunspots magnetic fields allow more cosmic rays into the solar system. This trend, which is expected to continue for years to come, could add up to even more gigantic jets in the future. Stay tuned.
Wow. What is it equalizing with? Like, something in outer space?
Space.
Like, equalizing with space.
It is equalizing with all of space. I don't know.
All right, Yahoo News. Devastating solar storm is a matter of when, not if. Warren's Met Office as solar orbiter begins testing. So there's another space probe, folks.
Another sun probe.
Oh yeah, sun probe, sorry. A devastating solar storm which could wipe out communications on Earth and fry power grids is a matter of when, not if. The head of Met Office's Space Weather Monitoring Center has warned, as we already told you in the headline. Extreme space weather has already caused widespread disruption, with a geomagnetic storm leaving 6 million people without power in 1989, while Apollo astronauts narrowly missed being exposed to deadly radiation in 1972 and solar flares in 2003, forced the crew of the International Space Station to take cover. You know, all those Van Allen belt people are like, The largest solar storm ever recorded, the Carrington event in 1859, knocked out telegraph systems and even set fire to paper in offices. To help forecast such devastating phenomena, the European Space Agency is launching the Solar Orbiter probe in 2020 to monitor the sun. And yesterday, unveiling the spacecraft at Airbus ahead of a year of testing in Germany. And they got a picture of it here.
Airbus, huh?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Catherine Burnett, head of the Met Office's Space Weather Monitoring Unit, said, Solar Orbiter is a research mission which in the long term will be to understand much more about the sun and why it behaves as it does. So in the future, it should help us spot disrupting events so we can prepare for them.
Oh, yeah.
Hell yeah. The threat of space weather to national infrastructure, UK industry, and the wider public is such that it is now part of the government National Risk Register. National Risk Register. And then,
Oi, governor.
and there is a need for forecasting to try to mitigate that risk. We try to advise when space weather will have an impact on technology. We are also looking for solar flares, which can knock out high-frequency telecommunications. I don't know where that guy is from.
Did you put that flare on the what is it called? The National Risk Register, oi? Governor? You got a permit for that flare? Gotta love bureaucracy.
They say, we think that the big solar incidents, like the Carrington event, happen between 1 in 100 or 1 in 200 years. So it is a case of when, not if. We have one.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to get to where the script lives.
The scriptards.
But they're actually, so the UK is doing this, and they're gonna, like, we're basically doing this joint project. Like, they're gonna work together with our sun probe. Let's see. This is an exciting
4 million
time.
miles away.
This is an exciting time for solar science. UK research and engineering teams are at the heart of this mission, which will help us understand more about our star, the sun, and its effects on us here on Earth.
Yes.
So, in related news, National Solar Observatory mysteriously closed as geomagnetic storm looms. I'm sure that some of you have heard of this. This is from ZeroHedge.com. The National Solar Observatory in Sunspot, New Mexico, has been closed since last Thursday. ABC 7 Monday spoke with Sherry Lifson, who is with Aura, A-U-R-A, the company that co-manages the observatory with the New Mexico State University. The Association of Universities for Research in Astronomy, who manages the facility, is addressing a security issue at this time. We have decided to vacate the facility at this time as a precautionary measure. It was our decision to evacuate the facility. Lifson told ABC 7 that there is no timetable for the observatory to be reopened. ABC 7 has also reached out to the FBI, but did not hear back from the federal agency in time for the deadline. The FBI did speak with local law enforcement about the length of the observatory closure. The FBI is refusing to tell us what's going on. We've got people up there at Sunspot that requested us to stand by while they evacuate it. Nobody would really elaborate on any of the circumstances as to why. The FBI were up there. What their purpose was, nobody will say. But for the FBI to get involved that quick and be so secretive about it, there was a lot of stuff going on up there. There was a Black Hawk helicopter, a bunch of people around antennas and work crews on towers, but nobody would tell us anything. The FBI did not tell Sheriff House the reason for the closure. Sheriff Benny House did tell ABC 7 that his local law enforcement did not have anything to do with either the observatory closure. For the conspiracy-minded, Sunspot is a mere 130 miles from Roswell, New Mexico, and about 90 miles from the White Sands Missile Range. Established in 1958, the observatory predates the unincorporated area in the Sacramento Mountains that was named for it. All of which would be odd enough, but as... Sorry, I had to laugh at this website name. SHTFplan.com, which is shithitsthefan.com. Max Slavo details below. The observatory is closed just as a massive hole is opened up in the sun's corona, which means we're officially on watch for a shitload of beer. For a geomagnetic storm. Auroras will be likely across much of North America as the sun heads into a solar minimum. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has issued a storm watch for a G2 level storm on September 11th. Yeah. So, nobody knows why.
Well, wait a minute. They came out with another story recently. I just read it.
Yeah, and it's just more nobody knows anything and it's still closed.
They I was just looking
I just read it too. I went through it and I couldn't find any actual reason for it to be closed.
They're reopening it. They announced when they were going to reopen it or whatever.
Right, but it's just like nobody has told anybody anything about whatever the security problem was. That's what was interesting to me.
Yeah, what they were saying was there was a person of interest in an investigation for crimes, and they didn't want to like say anything about it because it could
somebody who worked at the observatory, or that somebody was threatening it.
Yeah, somebody having to do with it, or somebody that was saying something about it or whatever, and they didn't want to say that it was about this to alert the person that they were on to them or something like that. I wish I would have saved it in my bookmarks, but I didn't. But yeah, basically they were like, ho hum, no big deal.
So the end of the article says,
doesn't explain
just in case you were blowing off the tinfoil hat views of the observatory closure, we note that all these solar space cams are down at the same time. The Axis 232D network dome camera located in Sydney, Australia, webcams located at SOAR Observatory and the Southern Astrophysical Research Telescope in Chile, the BRT Tarife telescope webcam located in Spain, webcam located at Mauna Kea Observatory at the University of Hawaii in Hilo, webcam at the Canada, France, Hawaii Telescope Observatory in Hawaii, and the webcam at JAT Observatory in Fairless Hills, Pennsylvania.
Wow. Yeah, here it is. A solar observatory in New Mexico reopened Monday after being closed by authorities for 10 days, which spawned national interest and speculation into the cause of its evacuation. Let's get this out of the way. Scientists say that aliens were not involved.
Of course they would say that.
It was suddenly closed by the Association of Universities for Research in Astronomy, the consortium that operates it, without public explanation. But the story that I read said it had to do with a criminal investigation or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's probably...
Who knows?
Probably aliens. I don't know, therefore aliens.
Yeah. So, I had some corrections I wanted to make, and now I can't remember them.
One more thing. First, private, or I don't know, passenger going to the moon?
Yeah, the Japanese pop star guy.
Yeah. He's paying, like, how much is he paying? I can't remember.
I don't know, but it's a lot. He's going to take a bunch of people with him.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's taking like 7 or 8 artists, and he's going to pay for all of them, so it's going to be a lot of money, but
that's cool.
They're supposedly going in 2024.
Something like that, yeah. Elon Musk has got the something.
The BFR?
Yeah. Big Falcon rocket.
Sure. That's what that means. I played Quake. The BFG was not the Big Falcon gun.
The Big Falcon rocket.
Stand down.
So one thing I wanted to say, and this is actually from 2 episodes ago. I can't remember if I said it last. I don't think I did because we were talking about a bunch of other stuff. But I was saying that the carvings on these various things found all over the world were lizards, and Brett actually pointed this out, and I think he's right that they are some form of cat, a puma, or a leopard, or something like that. So like. The reason I was thinking lizard is
because of Shadow of the Colossus. Every time you come to an ancient ruin, there's a lizard running around on it, and you gotta cut its tail off.
That could be it. I didn't play that game, but yeah, that could be it. That totally could be it. It was because the carving that I was specifically thinking of is the one on the Silestani or Chulpa statues in Peru. And that one is flat. So when you look at that one, and you can go back to episode 64, I think, and see these pictures, that one's flat. But after looking at all the other ones, which are much more detailed, and they look like cats, looking at that one again, it is a cat.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
So I definitely think it's
puma?
Yeah, a puma. Or a jaguar.
A jaguar. Jaguar.
But the one on the T-pillar of Göbekli Tepe is definitely a cat. Like, it's not a lizard. But you look at that one and look at the style, and then you look at all the other ones, and you can see that they're the same, and they're not a lizard, they're cats. Which is why in the Dolman School commercial, there's the whole lizard puma deal.
Yeah, that's right.
It's supposed to be a lizard. I think you should make it a puma. Let's see. There was something else. I can't remember what it was, so it doesn't matter. I'll think of it at some point. But we do have some other things from that conversation that we wanted to finish up on. In terms of like scriptards and their scripturping and like common arguments that they'll make. And I should repeat that we have kind of gone through these before on very early episodes, like in the teens. I can't remember exactly which ones, but some of the terms that they'll use. So we went through some of these on 65. But after the show was done, we were still talking about it, and we recalled these. Like, they'll use these terms that are, or these phrases that have to do with like criminal or court, proceedings, like, the person bringing the evidence has the burden of proof. Right.
That's right.
And if you're like, so they'll say like, well, the burden of proof is on you, and that is not true in science. Like, that is a fantastic and revolutionary
political idea
and criminal law theory idea. Like that like the burden of proof is on the prosecution or the state or the accuser, and the person being accused does not have to prove anything. All they have to do is show that there is like reasonable doubt. Right? In other words, the burden of proof is on the state, and that is, if you look at most of history, where the burden of proof was on the person being accused by the state, that's ridiculous. Like,
right.
And that was why, like, justice was so hard to come by, unless you were, in general, of like higher class, and then you were rarely charged at all. Right?
If the king declared you made fun of his hat, you die. Unless you can prove you didn't. There's no way to prove you didn't.
Right. So if you're talking to somebody and you're like, well, you know what, like, it seems like there could be an ancient civilization. They're like, well, the burden of proof is on. No, it isn't. That isn't true. Now, it isn't totally true to say that, like, you can just go in there and like make some claim and like the burden is on them to disprove you. Okay, but that is actually, and that isn't true, but that is actually closer to how science
more
works.
scientific, because it's all about falsification.
Right. So
well, the way I put it in the conversation that we had was that the burden is on everybody to falsify it.
Right.
In science.
Yes. The way the burden is set up in science is that whoever is presenting an argument presents their argument. However good or bad it is, however many facts or few it has, is immaterial. After that, what is incumbent on anybody else responding is to falsify it. And if their argument's bad and they have very few facts, falsification is easy. So if you go in and you're like, well, I think this and this and this, or I have this alternative way of looking at it, and someone's like, well, the burden of proof is on you, you can be like, yeah, like, this isn't court.
Yeah.
Okay? And proof, this is another thing. Proof is for math. Right? There's no such thing as proof in science.
Yeah.
Proof is for math in courtrooms, again. Okay? And it's, again, on the state to show any kind of proof of anything. Right? They have to prove that you did something. You don't have to prove you didn't. So, like, somebody saying, well, where's your proof of this in science or whatever, they're talking nonsense. You can never prove anything to be true. You can show facts that indicate that it might be true, or that, you can
show results of experiments that suggest that it's true.
That suggests a certain way of thinking, but you can't prove anything to be true, because, like, so when you go back to the entire, like, philosophy of science, and then you have to go back to philosophy to get to this, like, Descartes did this thing where, everybody knows, like, cogito ergo sum,
Yeah, everybody knows.
Who is that? It's Descartes, which is spelled like, it's not spelled like it sounds. I can't remember. He's a French guy, but basically, I think therefore I am, right? His whole deal was like, in philosophy, if you take all of human knowledge and like imagine everything that we know, or that we think we know, and you have it a table, and it contains everything we know. And if you remove everything off that table and you just completely empty it, and then starting from nothing on the table and using only logic and reason, what can you put back on the table? Definitely. And there's nothing. You can't put anything back on the table. The only thing he could put on the table is that since he's asking the question, he exists. That's all he could do. Okay. Yeah, so here we go. René Descartes was a French philosopher, mathematician, and scientist, a native of the Kingdom of France. He spent about 20 years of his life in the Dutch Republic after serving for a while in the Dutch States Army of Maurice of Nassau, Prince of Orange, and the stadtholder of the United Provinces. Wikipedia. I didn't know Wikipedia had provinces. So Descartes was a philosopher and mathematician and scientist, but he was, this is the beginning of the scientific thought, or of what we think of as scientific thought, like royal philosophy, and they built this idea of falsification. In other words, that the best way to investigate the universe and the way things work is to use observation, and then you build up a set of facts, you come up with hypotheses, and then you try to break those hypotheses in order to get closer to the truth. But you can't actually say something is true for sure. You can observe something and say, well, while I was observing this thing or doing this experiment, X or Y happened, but you can't say that is therefore what always happens, because it isn't.
Right.
Somebody else can repeat the experiment.
Or you could come up with a theory that is therefore what always happens.
Right.
And then somebody else can falsify it by doing their own experiments and saying, oh, sometimes this happens.
Exactly.
But you can't say, again, that only these two things happen.
Right.
It could be a theory.
Yes,
But-
exactly. And the proper way to present a hypothesis, one of the things that the Comet research group has done, and they do this, you put out a paper, and a proper scientific paper that is proposing a new theory will at the end give falsifications. If anyone finds this data, or this in experiment, then our idea is wrong. Right. That is so you give falsifications. Even Darwin did this when he presented his hypothesis or theory of evolution. He presented several things that he said, if these things are found to be true, and they have been, then this idea is not correct. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the way to do science. So if somebody says, oh yeah, the burden of proof is on you because you're bringing this idea, that's false. The burden of proof doesn't exist. That's a court term. What happens is you show up with a new idea, and it's incumbent on everyone else to look at the idea and then reasonably falsify it or not, right? Do experiments, check if you put it forward and you say, here are three things that if are found to be true, that makes this whole idea wrong, then other people are to check those things, to try to see if they can see if those things happen or not.
Okay. I was listening to that Joe Rogan podcast with the skeptics and Graham Hancock and what
Michael
he said,
Shermer.
Michael Shermer was saying to Graham, he's like, well, there's so many of these alternative theories that
scientists don't have time.
We don't have time to consider all of your theories. Well, you expect us to we have to go deal with yours and all this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. Right. We
We're
don't
smiling,
have
right?
we don't have time to look at all your theories, so we just assume that they're wrong.
I was just thinking that's their way around. They're not saying
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh well, we don't have time to look at your theories because they're a dime a dozen. There's all
Right. Yeah. What he was actually saying was that actual scientists don't have time to look at all of your crap because it's crap.
Yeah.
And so here we are as professional skeptics, and it's our job to kind of wade through all of your crap, but even we don't have enough time to wade through all of your crap, so we just go after the big names like Graham Hancock.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. And they do say that. They say the reason why, because people are like, well, how come, what's wrong with this idea, and how come scientists don't look at this? And skeptics will say, well, they don't have time. They're busy doing real science. So this is the point. This is the reason why we're talking about this. Real science, actually, it's incumbent on scientists to not think they know everything, right? You can't actually do science if you think you know something to be true and you're totally just discounting whatever because it doesn't agree with what you think you already know. That isn't scientific. So, burden of proof, not a real science term. Don't let somebody trick you with that. The next one that we talked about after the show last week was extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Yeah. Right? And you had a bunch of comments on that.
Yeah, well, that presumes that, what is the definition of extraordinary?
Right.
Right? That they own it.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you believe a certain theory, then anything outside that is extraordinary to you. But who gets to define that term, right?
Right, exactly.
So that is already disingenuous.
Right.
Basically.
Exactly.
If the idea of well, not only that, but it's already false. It doesn't even require The nature of the evidence doesn't have to be extraordinary.
Right. That's right.
You know what I'm saying? Like it's just total bullshit. It's just one of those.
The addition of the word extraordinary is what makes it bullshit.
Yeah.
Like you could say, well, claims require evidence. That's true.
Right.
You know, I mean, like if you make a claim, you should probably have some evidence for it, at least a little bit, or else it's just a claim. Right. You know, what they're actually trying to say is that any claim you make requires some evidence. Well, they're not trying to say this, but what you should say is like a claim should like require some evidence for somebody to like with a reasonable mind to like start to look at it. If I just go out and make a baseless claim, I'm free to do that, but no one has to believe me if I don't have any evidence, right? Now, if I make a claim and then I put some evidence into it, they can't claim that my claim is extraordinary and that my evidence is not, and therefore they don't have to look at it.
Right.
Because
so
again,
they basically get to define the term extraordinary for your claim and also for your evidence,
right?
And that is their argument to say you're wrong,
right?
Like your claim is extraordinary, your evidence is not. Therefore,
right?
It's just total bullshit.
Yeah,
it's complete.
So trash. Someone says extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. That is a complete. That is just. People who usually people who say it don't know that they're saying something disingenuous. They don't realize that. So. Knock them down gently. Unless you know that they're a professional scriptard. I'm usually just like, look, man, like, what's extraordinary?
Yeah.
You know, in my opinion, what I'm saying isn't extraordinary. And like, you can't put extraordinary in science because it isn't. It's a nebulous term.
Yeah.
And it's based on like subjectivity, which is the antithesis of science. Science is supposed to be objective. There is no such thing as extraordinary in an objective sense.
Yeah.
And it also kind of goes back to something I was saying in episode 65 about like our tiny little lives on this little bitty tiny planet in this little tiny period, you know, of this universe that the standard model says is 14 billion years old and is enormous. So like, who is the like arbiter of extraordinary?
I cannot do that.
Yeah. Brett's pointing out heliocentricity used to be extraordinary in a geocentric model.
Right.
Yeah. But
clearly everything goes around us.
Right.
Give me some actual evidence that that's not happening.
Right. The totally ordinary evidence that was provided was that we're actually going around the sun.
Right. And that we're spinning. We are a ball that's spinning. That isn't extraordinary evidence, but your claim is extraordinary because you look at the sky and it's clear that everything's going around us. Yeah, so don't let those those are pretty common. I see those all the time. Like, don't let people use courtroom terms on you when you're discussing some kind of scientific or any kind of idea. Just don't let them do it. You know, just be like, bro, we're not in court. Or I'm not a mathematician. I don't have to prove to you that the Pythagoras theorem is working. Like, proof in math is something you can do. Like, I can sit down with all these abstract symbols and shapes and prove that if you do this, that every single right triangle is going to be this way, right? That's a proof in math. And mathematicians are expected to provide proofs of that sense to show their math idea. And again, in court, proof is something that the prosecutor is supposed to show evidence, proof that the defendant did this or did not.
And it's ultimately, in that sense, something that a jury decides is proof, or that the judge decides is proof, which is freaking subjective.
Right.
It's not even, you know.
Right. So don't let them use courtroom terms on you, because that's a big trick. Just be like, hey, bro, we're not in court. I mean, if you want to go to court, that's fine. I'll take you to court.
Prove me wrong, bro. I'll take it to court.
Your Honor, I am suing this man for using courtroom terms on me in a scientific discussion. $1 million in damages.
I cannot do that.
So yeah, we wanted to address those. Those are other very common tropes of scriptards.
I have one more thing. We got a little bit of time here.
Okay.
I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos recently.
Okay.
and I keep getting these commercials that I started watching.
Okay. It's working.
Yeah, because they had Graham Hancock and all these people and like pyramids and everything. And I was like, what is this? Finally, I clicked on it. It's called Ancient Civilizations, and it's by like it's a website or whatever called Gaia,
Oh, yeah.
Gaia. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So they have like 8,000 documentaries and original series that explore human and cosmic stories.
Oh, cool.
They charge a monthly fee.
Okay.
Okay, so you have a month trial. It's 99 cents for the first month to start the trial. There's like
Yeah, I'm familiar with the website. They
Okay.
do have some good stuff on there, yeah.
so far like I guess the Ancient Civilizations thing. They have 2 seasons out. It's got David Wilcock, Corey Good, Graham Hancock, Linda Moulton Howe, Andrew Collins, Graham Sear, I'm not sure how to pronounce all these, Freddie Silva, Sean Stone, Greg Braden, Michael Cremo, Robert Bivall, Robert Schock,
Yeah.
a bunch of these guys.
Corey Good.
And
Very
from the... Be careful because Gaia Online is an anime-themed MMORPG. Okay. This is actually www.gaia.com.
Yeah.
So, I don't know what you're talking about there, Watcher. I don't know what you've been
He's
watching.
saying Gaia.com. Gaia Online is an anime-themed MMORPG,
Okay, okay, I got you.
which means it's, got hot chicks in it.
Okay. Sweet.
One has hot chicks in it, the other one has ancient stuff.
So, yeah, like in Season 2, Episode 1, Mathematical Codes of Baalbek.
Sweet.
2, Sumerian King Lists and Anunnaki Oaths. 3, DNA and Seeds of Re-Civilization. Rise and Fall of the Wise Woman. Lost Civilizations of the Pre-Adamites. There's just like, they just look awesome, dude. From the previews,
Yeah.
they look really badass. So,
Cool.
I haven't checked them out yet, so I'm not saying they're totally badass, but if anybody wants more than Ancient Aliens, this looks like the next badass thing.
Sweet.
And they're doing this like by subscription, so they're kind of going their own road. They're not using
Yeah.
Netflix or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that's also kind of cool.
That is cool.
I'm thinking about doing it.
So it starts out at, you get a
Yeah.
99 cents for what, first month, and then
Yeah,
what?
but I think it's like $10 or something like that.
Okay.
A month. I can't remember, and I'm not super.
I'm actually a member of the Ancient Origins members website, which they also charge they charge for it. They have fantastic articles there, but I haven't
Okay.
spoken to them about.
Sorry, go ahead.
I haven't spoken to them about reading those articles on the podcast, which I need to do. I need to send them an email and ask if that's okay, because they charge for it, and I don't want to read. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like read entire articles from their paid website onto the show for free. So I need to
cannot do
ask them
that.
because they have some really good stuff.
So yeah, it's if you do it by the month, it's $9.95 a month.
Yeah, so $10 a month.
There's a 3-month plan that you can do for $20.
Yeah, that's how I do it with Ancient Origins.
There's an annual plan for $95.
Yeah.
So, and then you can cancel it or whatever, but just look cool. So I wanted to let y'all know. Ancient pyramids
All right, cool. Well, we're gonna take a quick break and come back.
with snakes. Keeping Enlil awake with our endless babble. Brothers of the Serpent podcast. I cannot sleep by reason of the babble.
Yeah, so you've been going through Gilgamesh.
Yeah.
Did you want to do that this week, or do you want to do that some other time?
I'm down. Whatever.
I mean, maybe You need to be like decisive here.
Why are you asking me on air?
Because I had forgotten about that.
On
Not live.
on air. Not live.
On the ground.
Gilgamesh, king in Uruk. That's a great story.
Well, I have this thing that I've been looking into, and I've looked into this before, but I haven't put all this stuff together before. But, okay. It's gonna be hard. There's so many pieces of this story. So, like, the first thing I'm gonna say is I'm telling you a story. I'm not saying this is true. I'm telling you a story that has pieces of evidence that are true, that are confirmed. There's documents for them. I'll dig up as many of them as I can to put in the show notes, but I'm not going to read any actual documents. I do have one soundbite that goes along with part of the story. But this is a very strange rabbit hole, and but it definitely falls into the category of alternate history. So,
Stand down.
it's about Antarctica, and everybody knows that weird shit has been happening there. Like, you can, well, not everybody knows that, but there's this pact, first of all, a pact of nations. It was initially signed by like 12 nations, and now there's like 55 on it or whatever, that basically says that Antarctica, that everyone can put bases there, but they all have to be purely scientific, no weapons development, no military, okay?
Right.
Yeah.
So we use the military to build the bases, and then they leave.
So, but where I want to start with this is going to seem strange, but like in the late 1800s, all the way up to World War I, and even after that, but really the period that I'm talking about. Okay, Brett's brought it. The accord was signed by 24 of the 26 consultative treaty members, nations with full voting rights, and by 7 other countries. Consultative status is granted to nations that have scientific bases in Antarctica. That's recent. That's 1991. The accord was. The initial
This is
one
by
was
the UN, right?
Yeah, the initial one was it was a lot closer to the end of World War II. Anyway, late 1800s up to World War I, there was a whole very strange episode. I can't remember if I've mentioned this on the show before or not, but it doesn't matter. There's a very strange series of sightings in the United States and elsewhere in the world of, they're called the airship sightings, okay? And it's basically like, think of, this is like UFOs in the pre-UFO era. No one knew anything about, no one had the term flying saucer, UFO, a whole alien thing was not really being considered, but people were having sightings, and this is one of those deals where there are so many reported sightings that are so similar from all across the nation that you can't just you can't just throw them out offhand. I mean, you can if you want, but in my opinion, this is kind of like the Giants deal. Like, there's so many reports of the same things that it becomes like unscientific to just throw them all out offhand.
It was a hoax fad, Russ.
A hoax fad. So the sightings were, when you look at them, it's like what you get is like a classic sighting would be some farmer is out in his field, okay, or he's near his farmhouse or whatever, and a ship comes down from the sky. Now remember, this is like pre-flight, okay? No, we didn't have airplanes. This is before the Wright brothers, okay? At least the late 1800s stuff. So you can't blame it on anything like that. This is like, people knew about balloons, okay? And it's possible, this is the idea, it's possible that there was some Zeppelin stuff happening, but if it was secret. But these ships would come down out of the sky, and they didn't have balloons on them, okay? The descriptions by the witnesses were not describing Zeppelins or hot air balloons. They were describing mechanical devices. And then people would get out of them, and these were not aliens, they were humans. They spoke English, right? They're usually reported as being beautiful people. Like, they would come out, they would get out of the machines. They'd be tall. You know, like a lot of people call them the Nordics. Like the term for them now is Nordics. They were tall, blonde, blue-eyed, you know, strong. The men were like broad-shouldered and over, you know, like 6.5 feet tall and just chiseled features. And the females were just gorgeous and like whatever. They call them like Nordics. They were, you know, these ice, like think of Nordic people. They were blonde-haired, blue-eyed, like light-colored skin. Okay, they would land their machines in the farmer's field and get out, and the farmer would be like, you know, what in tarnation? And they'd come up and ask him for something weird, like water with salt in it, or something like that. The guy would give them what they asked for, and then they would, you know, like there was one report that I remember. I don't remember the specifics of the report except this one part where the guy said, the farmer, or the person who's the witness said, like, well, you know, like, where are you going? Or like, you know, where have you come from? Where are you going? And they were like, well, we'll be in Spain later tonight, or we're going down to South America and then we'll be in Spain later today, or whatever. And then as time goes on, you see that they start to claim that these same sightings, the sightings begin to evolve. The nature of the sightings begin to evolve. They like at first the witnesses are looking at machines that they think they can comprehend. They see large, like propellers, right? But like think of drones, how they have a big circle and the propellers contained in the circle, and there's 4 of them around a central body. Some of them were described like that, but they're large enough, and these people are coming out of them. You know, they would land the thing, and then later on the propellers go away, and there's just spinning parts. And they were usually noiseless, and they can move. They moved like very strangely. As the reports go on, you start to see they become more and more like streamlined, where there's less. The thing just starts to look like a teardrop, okay, or a big fixed wing craft. And then later on, you have the classic flying saucer things, and they move in these very strange ways, like. Some people describe them as falling leaves, right? So it would kind of do this weird drifting back and forth, like it was balancing on something. So these sightings happen all the way up, and then you have World War I. Okay. After World War I, Germany starts doing interesting things with Antarctica. Okay. Now this is, again, I'm not gonna name documents or whatever, but they do exist, and you can look them up, and I'll try to provide some links and stuff in the show notes. But there are documents that, so after World War I, Germany there were German nationalists, okay? So you had the eventual rise of the Nazis, okay? But you had German nationalists too, who were not Nazis. There's a big difference. Like, the Nazis were racists and ideologues. Nationalists just loved Germany, right? You don't have to be racist to be a nationalist, so there's a difference there. And then there's these weird secret societies, strange secret societies in Germany. Some of them ended up being SS people for World War II. So like you have the Thule Society, or whatever, however you'd say it, Thule or Thule. They end up being part of the German SS, and it's pretty well known, especially among people who look at alternative history, that these guys were very interested in ancient artifacts and ancient technology, and they had some strange beliefs about the inner Earth and aliens and things like that. They sent an expedition to Tibet, you know, and Tibetan monks were found in Hitler's bunker, dead, of course, because of all the bombing. So let's see. I forget where to go with this. Okay, so in between World War I and World War II, Germany wanted to get back to being a superpower, which it was before the First War. Okay,
Stand down or die.
they had lost what you would consider to be their colonies, that their European, acquisitions had been taken back from them. But they thought that they needed colonies in order to be a superpower again. And it's kind of understandable. Like, the whole colony thing was how the West expanded massively.
Yeah.
Okay, so the only place that they could put colonies was at the poles. Now, this is also something that's sort of well known in alternative circles, that there's this idea that the Nazis went to the poles and had polar bases and stuff like that. Now, I don't know about any of that, but I do know, and there's documents to support this, because of the actions that the United States took resulting from these things, is that there were people from Germany who were looking at Antarctica for colonies, not military bases, but think colonies. They wanted to establish colonies in Antarctica. Now, of course, you're like, that's freaking crazy. It's freezing there, and the only penguins live there, and they hate it, right? But what's fascinating, and this is something I'd recently found out, this was kept secret all the way up until the end of World War II, but what's fascinating is that the Germans were not trying to establish colonies on the surface of Antarctica. Okay? They already had rudimentary U-boat technology in between the wars. That's why when we started to fight, they started to like destroy our merchant shipping when we were trying to help the Europeans out during the war, and they were doing it with these boats that nobody could freaking see. Like, they already had tons of submarines, okay? So they started sending people, expeditions. First of all, they were doing flyovers of the Antarctic area and dropping German flags in various spots, just from planes, dropping them, like, to claim that spot, right? And the United States got concerned that they were violating the Monroe Doctrine, which, if you don't know, the Monroe Doctrine was basically telling Europe and the rest of the world, don't colonize the West. And the West is considered to be the Americas and, you know, that part of the, like, we say North and South Hemisphere, but there's also a way to divide the world East-West. Yeah. America's the middle of the West, and that goes from pole to pole. So when the Americans found out that the Germans, in between World War I and World War II, were going down to South America, to Antarctica, and dropping flags and looking at doing colonies down there, they wanted to find out, are they violating the Monroe Doctrine and settling the western, like, pie-shaped piece of Antarctica. So they went down there and looked, and they weren't. The Germans were looking at the area of what's known as Queen Maud Land, which is not the western part of Antarctica. Yeah. So the Americans were aware of this, but decided that the Germans weren't violating anything, and they didn't do anything about it, but they were keeping an eye on them. Now, what's interesting is that the Germans were dropping flags on the surface around Queen Maud Land and stuff, but they didn't try to build anything there. What they ended up doing was sending submarines down there and mapping waterways under the ice.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you go and look at if you go and look at a map of Antarctica without the ice sheet, you see that it's two large land masses with a big channel going in between them, and there's a mountain range and all this kind of stuff. The Germans are basically going down there in these U-boats and finding freshwater river outlets under the ice and sailing, like, running their submarines up the rivers beneath the ice sheet. Okay? So they left the ocean. Yeah. And were in the riverways. And as they were going up the rivers and stuff, they started getting closer to the mountains. Now, this is something that just came out recently. Well, it's 2016, 2017 or whatever. Antarctica is now the most volcanic continent on the planet. Like, that used to be held by Africa and something else. But they found so many freaking volcanoes, and these are active volcanoes, under the ice, okay? So as they went up the rivers, they started finding these enormous caverns that had been melted from the underside by giant volcanic vents.
That's freaking awesome.
So they're warm in there. So, like, you have this huge freaking ice cavern, and like they would just surface their U-boat and get out, and you have all this rock, and it's dark and barren, but it isn't cold because there's a vent, and it's made this giant bubble underneath the ice. Okay. So,
wouldn't it be like, I mean, what would the gas be that's in there?
I don't know.
I guess it had enough oxygen.
I mean, it's not. I don't know the specifics, but I do know that they established like 12 different. And this is not World War II era yet. This is between World War I and World War II. They started up 12 different quote-unquote colonies down there. And this was not really addressed in World War II. Like, World War II was like everybody versus the Nazis and Japan. But what's interesting is that, so there was some involvement with the Nazis in these, and I think, okay, so I don't know politics of Germany, and I didn't go down this rabbit hole to look into this stuff, but there were factions, obviously. There's factions everywhere. There were factions within Germany, and the Nazis came to power, but not everyone in Germany was happy about that.
Right.
Okay. And so let's get past this. So like basically, they established.
Stand down.
You can't call them bases. They established something. 12 different places under the ice in Antarctica before World War II started out. Okay, before World War II broke out, which was the Nazis attempting to, what was their? They wanted to like establish the Fourth Reich for 1,000 years or whatever. That was their whole idea, or the Third Reich for 1,000 years. And they were going to do it by conventional war, ground war means, and they failed. Okay, they failed.
I cannot.
What's interesting is that no one did anything with these. No one paid attention to these colonies down there. And there was some infighting with the factions, and it appears that the SS tried to, during the war, they tried to get their hands on some of these colonies, and they basically failed. Okay, they were not able to take them over. Now there was some involvement with some, and I can't remember all the names, but but basically the Germans got during the war and in between, they got really good at building these giant underground systems in Europe because of the Allied bombing. Okay, we were flying thousands of bombing runs every day and just dropping bombs all over the place, and so they got really good at building these massive underground complexes where that were basically huge industrial factories, so that they could continue working on their rockets and continue working on their various technologies they were trying to develop for the war effort. Now they ran out of time because once the United States joined the war, they ran out of time. If we hadn't joined the war, they wouldn't have run out of time, and they probably would have won. But what's interesting is they made so that the Germans, and I don't want to give a huge history lesson here on this war because World War II is well known, but like the Messerschmitt jet planes, if they would have focused on those, we would have lost. Okay? For some reason, they didn't. I'm not sure why. But there was a bunch of other projects. So when you go look into this, you can find conspiracy theories about the Nazi Bell. But the Nazi Bell looks to me like... It looks like a disinformation thing, okay? Because there's actually confirmed... So there were scientists in Germany that were working on torsion and plasma physics. And there's something there, and I was going to ask Kyle about this, but there's something there about spinning plasma very quickly that results in electrogravitics. Okay, so this is like things that will float. And there's actually I'll try to find this. There's a video clip of there's a prototype aircraft that they called the Hanabu or Hannibal. I don't know exactly. I can't remember what it is. Hanabu or whatever. The Hanabu 1. And there's a video, short, black and white, very old video or whatever. The thing picks up off the ground, drifts over, and then lands. And it's like a old school video, and they were doing these building these prototypes or whatever, but they were not able to. It was a brand new science. It's completely brand new, so they weren't able to get them. People are like, well, if they were building UFOs, how come they didn't win the war? And they're like, well, they didn't have time. But what's interesting is that no one was paying attention to Antarctica. And here's the other interesting point. Near the end of World War II, Hanabu 1, there it is. Haunebu 1, Hanabu 1. There was Hanabu 2, and some of the images you could find of these, they had cannon, and then the Germans were thinking that they would be anti-tank deals. Okay.
Yeah.
But they flew like nothing else ever before. They didn't use lift in the conventional sense. They were round, and there was something. They didn't spin themselves, but there was something in them about torsion physics and generating. I don't know how it works.
Yeah.
They didn't really know how it worked either. So this is what's fascinating. And again, remember that I don't have any evidence for this. This is the story that I've been looking at, okay?
Yeah.
So you guys might remember we read a CIA remote viewing of Mars onto the show sometime back, okay? Where they remote viewed, the guy was remote viewing Mars, and he didn't know he was looking at Mars. He just knew, he just had the coordinates. You know how remote viewing works. The guy they were using to do the remote viewing had an 80% accuracy rate, okay? Which is massive. That's ridiculously high. So, this is the idea that he witnessed an ancient civilization on Mars that underwent some kind of catastrophic geological event at some point in its past, and they left. And if you remember, I didn't actually remember this, so I'm not telling you to remember it, but the the person who was directing the remote viewing told him they were getting in these ships to flee their planet, and the guy said go with them and see where they go, and the guy was like, well, the place where they landed is like massively volcanic and is very strange, and but it's better than where they were. There's plants here at least. And okay, so this is the idea. The idea is that whatever these beings were on Mars came here. This would be the closest place for them to go.
Yeah.
They came here pre-end of Ice Age, pre-pole shift or crustal displacement, when Antarctica was free of ice and in a temperate zone. Okay, and they established themselves there. And then sometime later, and these are the Longheads. Okay, so we're going back to like also the testimony of the whistleblower woman from the World Bank, who said that like they had this massively powerful society that was global, that they influenced humans all over the place. And then there was a crash of their civilization when
now there's very few of them. And
right, they are the idea. And I don't have any way of. I don't know if this is true or not, but it's interesting because of ancient texts that when Antarctica rolled into the pole position that it's in now, and it started to get covered in ice, basically everything they built down there was flash frozen, and most of them themselves decided to go into some kind of stasis. So these become the fallen ones that are imprisoned beneath the earth. Okay. So we've talked about the Book of Enoch and everything like that, and you talked about how Enoch is taken somewhere where he says that, like, what does he say? That, like, it's daylight all the time, right? And there's some interesting things in there about that, so maybe he was taken to the pole, okay? He was supposed to be the intermediary between these two warring factions of quote-unquote angels or god beings, right? There was the ones that were the heavenly ones, and there was the ones that were fallen, and they wanted Enoch to go tell them, like, hey, guys, you just gotta stop doing what you're doing.
Right.
You know, stop mixing with these humans and making all this babble that's pissing everybody off. Right? And he goes to a place that is bathed in light all the time. He said the sun shone permanently. So that may have been him going to the South Pole during the daylight period, during the summer months of Antarctica. So this is interesting, too. Now, also remember, this is much more recent. I'm kind of skipping around here, but like, stay with me here. Lake Vostok. Lake Vostok in Antarctica is the freshwater lake that's beneath 2, 3, 4 miles of ice or whatever. And they actually discovered this in 2001. Okay. Maybe earlier. But what's interesting, I can't remember all the exact dates, but what's interesting is that, like, they were like, oh, we're going to drill down, we're going to find out all this information, blah, blah, blah. And then NASA was going to do it. NASA was going to be involved, okay, and the Americans are going to be drilling down to this thing or whatever. And then all of a sudden, like, there's this brief period, and then NASA suddenly becomes environmentalist. Oh, we can't do that. We're going to violate this million-year-old, like, ecosystem. Da, da, da. We're not going to do it. Okay, but they were actually initially saying, oh, yeah, it'll be great practice for our probes that we land on Europa, right? And then they decided, no, wait, I better not do that, blah, 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 blah. And that happened right after they detected this massive magnetic anomaly beneath the lake.
Yeah.
Suddenly they became environmentalists. I'm like, wait, how do magnets make you into an environment? Anyway, the Russians did it anyway, and if anybody remembers, they disappeared for like weeks. The Russians like made this announcement like, oh, you know, we have just like reached Vostok, blah, blah, blah. And then they go silent. And there's like news stories starting to come out that the Russian scientists at the Vostok facility have vanished. Okay. And then suddenly after a couple of weeks they come back, but it's all very tight-lipped and nobody says anything. And it's a very strange story. So some people think that magnetic anomaly down there is either one of these colonies. Okay.
Yeah, like their power grid or something.
Yeah, or just all the metals that are in there.
Yeah.
Or it's remnants of this ancient extraterrestrial civilization or whatever it is, the Longheads, right? It's the remnants of their stuff. But so basically what you do is what you end up with is this idea that there are some people who went down to Antarctica, started colonizing underneath the ice, and they either find ancient remnants of ancient technology, or they might even encounter beings that are involved or part of this. Okay, now the stories that I've looked at have all kinds of, they go way off, and I'm like, okay, I don't know if I'm gonna reptilians and then these inner earth beings and then all these other people, and I start thinking, I'm like looking at
there's a hole in the pole.
Yeah.
The other thing that it could be, though, the magnetic anomaly is if the freshwater lake is actually a crater.
Yeah.
From an impact.
Well, if you look at the shape of the magnetic anomaly, it's very long and strange looking. It doesn't look like but who knows? It doesn't. You could be right.
Saying that's one of the other.
Right, that it's a meteor down there. It's a meteorite, the remnants of one, a nickel iron meteorite.
Like the crater, and we talked about the Serpentine Mound, the one.
Yeah.
That's crazy geomagnetic anomaly.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that's one of the other theories about it.
Yeah.
Ideas.
Yeah. So here's what's interesting. Now I'm going to go back to the whole Germans going down there. So if what we're looking at here, or if what actually happened is that there were people who were trying to escape the Nazi regime that was coming more and more into power between World War I and World War II. Okay. They started diverting their stuff to these colonies. They're just getting out. And there's actually little towns nestled in the Andes in South America that are just all Germans. They're all they obviously fled there at some point, and they're still there. Right? This is not a disputed thing. It's known that there are a bunch of people that are from Germany, and they've been there for generations at this point. And their ancestors, their great-great-great-grandfather or whatever, fled what was the rise of the Nazis in Germany and just went to South America. Okay?
Yeah.
And they have these beautiful, little German towns in the middle of nowhere in the Amazon and the Andes or whatever. It's crazy. There's actually somebody that we know that's closely connected to us that we're kind of friends with their family who flies a private plane down there, and he has seen these places. He's landed people at the little runway strips they have in these little towns, and he's like, dude, it's like landing in a little German town in the middle of South America. It's crazy. So now I want to talk about Admiral Byrd. Okay, BYRD, Admiral Byrd, and Operation High Jump. Okay, so what people don't know is that Admiral Byrd actually went to talk to the Germans in Antarctica more than once. Okay, High Jump was supposedly a quote-unquote scientific mission. Okay. What's fascinating about High Jump is they call it a scientific mission to South America that took no scientists. They took
to Antarctica?
Yeah, I'm sorry, just to Antarctica. They went down there with an entire the Navy fleet, something like 3,000 Marines, a whole bunch of Navy guys, and no scientists.
Army Corps of Engineers?
What's also interesting is that Admiral Byrd, he went on some of the reconnaissance flights. His plane disappeared for 3 hours during one of the flights, and everybody they thought they'd lost him, that his plane had crashed or whatever. And then he just comes back, the plane just comes back out of nowhere, and he lands. And after that, he is quoted as saying that if there's another war, so this is post World War II. Remember, Operation High Jump was after World War II. They went down there, and it's pretty clear that they were going down there to see to try to talk to these other German nationalists that were down there in these colonies that no one had paid attention to during the war, because at this point, the United States is trying to make deals, right? We're worried about communist Russia. Okay, that's a huge threat. We've defeated the Nazis, and now we're trying to fix everything and work with these people. We got Operation Paperclip happening, which because the Russians are snatching up all these German scientists, we're we got to get them too, even if they're Nazis. So you end up seeing this whole the lesser of two evils. We know Russians are snatching up these brilliant Nazi scientists, some of whom committed or would have been the Nuremberg trials would have been convicted of war crimes.
Yeah.
But we had to have them too, so we start snatching them up too. So you end up with these Nazis in these high positions of power, and Werner von Braun was a Nazi. Okay, there's a couple other ones I can't remember their names, but they ended up getting a fast track to high positions of power in the space race, because we needed the rocket technology. At this point, the Russians were ahead of us, right? So we were I don't know. Like, I look at this and I'm like, I see people upset that the paperclip was bringing Nazis into the United States and then sort of hiding their crimes and sort of putting them into society and then whitewashing their records and giving them, like, Wernher von Braun was a hero, painted as this, like, all-American, you know, like, used to be a German guy, but all-American hero that's building us rockets, right? He was totally a Nazi, he had the Iron Cross and everything. Like, I don't know the man, I don't know anything about him, but the point is that this was a whole, you can see the calculation of, like, well, we can't let the Russians take space.
Yeah.
You know? So, like, people had to make choices where you have a bad choice and a worse choice.
Yeah.
Like, you can see this happening. So we're making deals and everything like that. The Americans are making deals, and, like, at some point somebody remembers that there's all these colonies, or maybe what they're doing is they're trying to find, like, there's all this effort to find stuff. So, like, you know, Germany has been leveled by bombing. Everything, like, there's just, all you see is rubble and churches, right? There's churches and rubble. And somehow the Allied bombing runs managed to miss all the churches, which is strange. I mean, they were trying to miss them, probably, but it's still interesting when you look at the pictures. Just like church, rubble, 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 church. You're like, how did they do that? Anyway, so people are going through records, you know, and looking for things, and it's like there's thousands of technicians that were never found, have still never been found. People are like, well, they died in the bombing runs, blah, 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 blah. 57 U-boats never found. Like, billions, estimated billions, maybe even trillions of dollars in industrial, like, industrial equipment, like rare, like art and gold and artifacts and things that they had taken from Europe. Like, they went through Europe and just looted everything, and most of that shit has never been found. So what's interesting is that during the war, there was, like, it was against the law for anybody to move any kind of capital, speaking of, like, in terms of money or, you know, property, to move capital for, like, so big companies, you know, like Iberfagen, whatever, these German companies, Messerschmitt, that are building stuff, right? It was against the law, punishable by death, for them to move any kind of resources out of Germany, because it was all supposed to go towards the war effort. Well, about a year before the quote-unquote end of the war, when people kind of could see the direction that it was going, and that the Nazi effort to like win the war by a conventional ground war and everything like that was going to fail, some of these companies and people, like German nobles and some of these companies or whatever, started to get, like, what admits to an executive order waiving them from this law. And they started moving resources out of the country en masse. Okay, and no one's ever found where that shit went. So another thing I gotta mention is, that's interesting, and this is just briefly, that American companies were working with these German companies a lot of times. And when World War II began, so there was the like, doing business with the enemy. There was an act against this. Like, the United States Congress passed this thing, like, you can't do business with the enemy's companies. All right, this is bullshit. Well, I can't remember if it was Truman or Roosevelt, whoever it was, passed waivers by executive order for certain American companies to continue to work with the German ones. Now, a lot of people look at that and they're like, oh my God, this is evidence, this is all about money, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, it's also easy to see that, like, if these American companies are already working with the German companies and then the war starts, well, this is a good like, source of intelligence.
Yeah.
Keep those American companies working with the German companies so that you can kind of figure out what they're doing. So that these, you know, so you end up having spies that are just engineer techs that are going back and forth. I don't know if that's true, and I'm running long here, and but the point that I'm getting to is that America, the United States, knew about the colonies. They knew about these like, there was the Foo Fighters during the war, these weird things that were, like, doing these intercepts but not attacking. Okay, anyway, and then you put that together with these alien Nordics, these blonde-haired, blue-eyed people that are flying weird machines, and that these secret societies in Germany were working on these machines, and these companies that disappeared with all of their resources were also working on these things, and that nobody paid attention to and still has yet to look at the colonies that we know were established in Antarctica beneath the ice sheet. Okay, so we're going to take a break. We'll come back, and I'll try to tie this together better into one long circular snake. Looking for ancient aliens at the South Pole. It's Brothers of the Serpent podcast. Hoping there's aliens, but not Nazis.
Yeah. Are there SSS snakes down there?
Snakes? The reptilians? So, getting back into this rabbit hole, I have a soundbite that we're going to play in a little bit, but leading up to it, this is the idea. So, like, some of you may have heard the soundbite before. It's it's sort of famous in UFO circles. It's like the head of the Air Force. I can't remember his name. Doesn't matter. It's Major General something or other. He's an Air Force guy, and he basically did this national address on the UFO situation. And it's because there was a UFO flyover of Washington, D.C. Now, everyone is like, "Oh, if they're aliens, how come they don't land on the White House lawn?" Well, they practically did in the early 50s. Okay. Yeah, John A. Sanford is his name. So it was a huge event. It was like, I mean, you can find newspaper articles, it's front, top of the fold headlines, pictures, the like whole fleets of these things were seen flying over the Capitol for multiple days. They actually scrambled fighters against them, and then all the scientists were like, no, do not shoot down try to shoot down extraterrestrials because they will destroy us, right? So this guy made this address, and that's the story that's in the open that everyone knows, or that you can easily find, that there was a gigantic mass UFO sighting over Washington, D.C. for multiple days right after World War II. So how that connects to, or how it may connect to the story that I'm telling, is again connected with Admiral Byrd and Operation High Jump. Okay, so the idea that I'm going for here is that the end of the war happens, and the United States is trying to make deals. Like, Europe is destroyed, Germany is destroyed, but we're trying to like scramble together because like suddenly we realize we have this giant enemy in communist Russia. Okay, the USSR. We're like, holy crap, this is not a good thing. And then we have the space race coming, and we're desperate. The United States is desperate for tech. Now, Germany was like, one of the things about World War II was Germany terrified everybody with their tech. Okay, their technology was terrible. I mean, it just scared the pants off of everybody. And so, like, the United States set up this, like, the whole quote unquote military industrial complex in the United States began because of the World War II, like the terror that people had. Like, they've got these submarines, and they, you know, it's like nobody had ever seen a lot of this stuff that Germany just like sort of rolls into Europe and starts destroying everything with, where everybody's like, oh my God, right? And they had thousands of genius scientists that were just working on everything, and some of them did a lot of really, really bad stuff. But the point is that the United States is trying to make deals, and they're like, we've won World War II, but they're already looking at possible World War III, what will eventually become the Cold War, right? Starting with the space race and everything like that. But somebody at some point remembers, like, you know, we're looking at all this paperwork and we're like, where is this submarine and this submarine with this U-boat? Where are all these U-boats? And where's all these artifacts? Where are these companies? Where's all their stuff? You know, where are all these technicians? Where are all these scientists that are in these papers? They're just not anywhere to be found, and they're not dead, and nobody's, you know, there's too many bodies that are missing, and then somebody's like, wait a minute, what about those colonies in South Pole? And they're like, oh shit. So they send Admiral Byrd down there, probably to try to make deals, you know, and again, what they're thinking probably is, at least they're not Nazis. These are the nationalists who escaped Germany.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the companies who were running, huge parts of the war effort during the war also started moving all their materials out, and that just stuff just vanished. And so Byrd goes down there, and apparently he fails. He fails to make a deal. Okay, or what I think what's interesting. So taking all that for just let's say that is all true, that they have these colonies and that they're working on this crazy technology down there. And because they weren't being bombed constantly like Germany was, so any effort to build these Hanabu flying saucer things in Germany was severely hampered by the fact that we were dropping thousands and thousands of bombs on them every day. Right? In the South Pole, that wasn't happening. Yeah. Okay. So Byrd goes down there to try to make a deal with these people. The United States desperately wants technology and know-how to fight this rising communist threat. Okay. But what's interesting is that these colonies in the South Pole have just suddenly been cut off from their resources. Now, there's probably resources there, but they're not easy to get to. Everything's under the ice, and
they don't have the infrastructure to get it yet.
Right, and whatever infrastructure they have is not for getting resources, because the resources were coming from.
Right, it's for surviving.
Right, and for building. These secret projects they're working on, if they're working on these things. So what I'm getting at here is that what if, and then you suddenly see so again, right after World War II is the modern era of UFO sightings begins. Okay, so we have all these weird, strange Nordic people flying around in things that are not dirigibles before this, that get closer and closer to looking like UFOs as time goes on, and then suddenly there's the war. And then after that, we have these UFOs. Now, the first one, Kenneth Arnold, this is in Washington State, not Washington, D.C., but in Washington State, Kenneth Arnold makes this sighting. This is the first one, and he's the one that coined the term flying saucer. Okay. Or no, I'm sorry. The media coined the term flying saucer because of his description of the way that they moved. Okay. He actually described and drew a fixed wing, he said it was like a saucer that had been cut in half, but that had a point in the middle. So think of a fixed wing craft, and he said that the way they moved was like a saucer skipping across a lake, so that they had this sort of leaf, bouncy, and he said that there were whole squadrons of them, but he could only, they were very difficult for him to see except for when they flashed in the sun. So they would make a correction and their wings would flash in the sun, and then he'd suddenly see them, but the way they moved was this bouncy sort of skipping motion. And they had no visible propulsion. Okay. So there's also the Battle of L.A. that happens at the beginning of World War II, which is very fascinating because this is like a gigantic object that sits over Los Angeles for hours, and they just shot everything they had at it, freaking out, thinking it was the Japanese, and they're shooting everything they had at it. This thing just floats there and just gets bombarded with all this crap, and I think 6 people died from shell fragments falling out of the sky.
Damn.
But they never damage this thing, and eventually it just moves off and just disappears. And there's great photographs of all these spotlights going up, and you can see this object up in the sky, and they're shooting everything they've got at it. The whole, the entire coastline defense is shooting anti-aircraft, everything, and just boom, 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 for hours, and it just sat there, took it, and then left. So the idea, people are like, oh, is there aliens, blah, blah, blah. But what if it wasn't aliens, if these things, what Kenneth Arnold saw, and then later on over Washington, D.C., is the result of these things that these people were working on, that there was humans. Now, they may have or may not, we don't have to bring extraterrestrials into this. There are even inner Earth beings. There could have been an ancient civilization down there, and maybe they were mining tech from this ancient civilization, and these people, maybe there are no aliens left, or no longheads left, or whatever, or maybe there were. That doesn't matter. The point is that most of the sightings that people made in the the late 1940s, the early 1950s, all the way up until the much more recent sort of gray phenomenon, the gray alien phenomenon. What you had before that was like these Nordics, and they were claiming they were from Venus, and then they would claim that they were from Jupiter or Europa or whatever. And then as NASA started launching things, and we look at Venus and we're like, no one can be from there. And we look at Mars and we're like, nobody lives there either. They started claiming they were farther and farther out from different star systems and shit like that. But at first they were claiming they were from other planets in the solar system. Okay? Yeah. But there are always these like tall blonde Aryans, basically. So the idea I'm getting at here is that there aren't any aliens in this story.
Yeah.
There are just like Germans.
Breakaway civilization.
Right, yeah. It's a breakaway civilization. And what better place for a breakaway civilization than under the ice sheet in Antarctica? Okay.
Especially if there's ancient ruins there.
Right.
Which I think there are.
Yes. Right. So here's the other thing. The point, and I'm going to get up to playing this soundbite. The flyover of Washington, D.C., if that was a result of the technology of these colonies, right, they were basically, this is a negotiating tactic. They're showing the United States, like, hey, like, they want to make a deal, but they want a deal from strength.
Yeah.
Okay? They're not like some lost, poor colonies. Now, they don't have resources, and they desperately need the United States for resources. They desperately need that. Okay? But they know that the United States also wants their tech, and they want to deal with them in their tech, but at the same time, they don't want to, like, they're not beggars.
Right.
They don't want a war with us either. Okay? So they started doing these, like basically brazen incursions into United States airspace, right? As a show of might. They don't hurt anybody, right? And this results in some kind of deal between the United States and these colonies, which later results in this whole strange Antarctica pact of nations that everybody can build bases there, but none of them are military.
Yeah.
Because these people under the ice don't want any freaking military bases on top of the ice.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it gives them... What's interesting is if you look at the way that accord is built, like any nation can at any point inspect the bases of any other nation. This is genius if you're the colonists underneath the ice, because this like makes them police each other and you don't have to, right?
And they're always bringing resources.
Right, the resources are always showing up there. So with all that in mind, let's play this clip from Major General John Sanford.
I'm here to discuss the so-called flying saucers. The Air Force interest in this problem has been due to our feeling of an obligation to identify and analyze to the best of our ability anything in the air that may have the possibility of threat or menace to the United States. In pursuit of this obligation, since 1947, we have received and analyzed between 1,000 and 2,000 reports that have come to us from all kinds of sources. Of this great mass of reports, we have been able adequately to explain the great bulk of them, explain them to our own satisfaction. We've been able to explain them as hoaxes, as erroneously identified friendly aircraft, as meteorological or electronic phenomena, or as light aberrations. However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things. It is this group of observations that we now are attempting to resolve. Our basic difficulty in dealing with these is that there is no measurement of them that makes it possible for us to put them in any pattern that would be profitable for a deliberate, custom sort of analysis to take the next step. We have, as of date, come to only one firm conclusion with respect to this remaining percentage, and that is that it does not contain any pattern of purpose or of consistency that we can relate with to any conceivable threat to the United States. We can say that the recent sightings are in no way connected with any secret development by any agency of the United States.
Major Keyhole, as author of the book Flying Saucers Are Real, What is your opinion of these new sightings of unidentified objects?
With all due respect to the Air Force, I believe that some of them will prove to be of interplanetary origin. During a 3-year investigation, I found that many pilots have described objects of substance and high speed. One case, pilots reported their plane was buffeted by an object which passed them at 500 miles an hour. Obviously, this was a solid object, and I believe it was from outer space.
I cannot do that.
Yeah, so the main part of that was the statement by General Sanford from the Air Force. And basically, his statements are very interesting. First of all, he said, like, the part that a lot of people pick up is that there are sightings of relatively incredible things by very credible people, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm spun that around. Sightings by very credible people of relatively incredible things. The other thing he says that after that they can't find any pattern that is any kind of that shows any kind of conceivable threat to the U.S. Okay. Now, if they were completely unknown, how could you possibly say that?
What do you mean?
Like, if they're actually interplanetary or space alien things, how do you know, if you don't know what they are, that they're a threat, right? I guess what I'm trying to point out is that what he says there
implies that they know more than just sightings of flying objects.
Right.
Yeah. I got you.
And then he also makes sure to say that they will categorically state that these are not the result of any kind of secret tech that the United States has.
Yeah.
Or any agency or department thereof, right? So those things are all very interesting because if, like, going with the story that I'm going with, like, this guy knows what these things are, and there's this like high stakes negotiation happening, and they have come to some sort of agreement at this point, right? And so he's basically saying they're not a threat. Why? Because they've come to an agreement.
Yeah.
With these like lost Germans or whatever you would call them, these
the breakaway civilization.
The breakaway civilization, and also that these are not the result of any secret United States projects.
Yeah. Except for
Yet.
the deal.
Yet. So, there's other audio that's interesting, but I couldn't find it in time for the show. So I will try to look for it, and maybe if I find some of the stuff, I'll put it in the show notes. There's a whole like hour and a half, or maybe close to 2 hours, that has a bunch of audio that is from this period of time of people talking about these things. It's not fiction. These are actual broadcasts that went over radio of people discussing these things. It's conversations with Major Kehoe, who's the guy who talked at the end, the guy who wrote the book. The flying saucers are real or whatever. So what I think is interesting is, like, and you could kind of carry this along, that there's been this disinformation campaign from this point forward. Okay? Disinformation in the sense that, like, so if these were actually aliens coming from space, what is the United States' interest in a disinformation campaign? Or their interest in being completely disinterested in them?
Yeah.
And stopping the Project Blue Book and all this other thing. Like, they're just like, we're not going to look at this anymore. We're not going to waste time for this anymore. Like,
Yeah.
people, why would you do that if these are actually completely unknown, possibly things from outer space?
Yeah.
That seems ridiculous, and this is what so many people have a hard time grasping, and this is why there's all these conspiracy theories that come out, like,
Yeah, it makes a lot more sense that they would shut down all that stuff because they now know what it is, and it's not extraterrestrials.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then there's the disinformation campaign, because that is part of their deal with these,
Right.
with the breakaway civilization. The breakaway civilization is like, you will not ever, say that we exist, and actually you are going to, like, and this is the other thing. The United States was very aware that the Germans, now I'm talking back in World War II again, the Germans were fantastic at disinformation. They were really good at it. Okay? This is one of the reasons why all these, the intelligence agencies in the Western world started. Like, part of it was because of the cryptography right? We needed people that could break these codes, so you end up with the NSA and what became the NSA. They were not the NSA at the time, but later became the NSA, and what later became the CIA were started during World War II to fight, the NSA in terms of cryptography and the CIA in terms of intelligence.
Yeah.
Okay. And there was this huge, sort of underground war going on with crypto and intelligence and technology and all this kind of stuff happening during the war. And this looks like a piece of it that is, so basically this story explains in a way the United States government's stance on UFOs ever since.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Now,
but what would be we made the deal exclusively because Russia goes down there, they're drilling, they're doing shit.
I'm not sure that Russia knew about the colonies. I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, because what I'm wondering is now that they've got bases down there and they're doing all this seismic testing and all this kind of shit, and what's, and also if we did get, some of their technology, are they just holding on to it for the next World War or what? I mean, why aren't we using it to go to space or whatever?
Well, this is where you get into the idea of a secret space program and all that kind of stuff. But I would imagine that the terms of the deal with the breakaway civilization is that they'll parcel out bits of technology or whatever, but the United States is not allowed to display it. You can't start flying around in flying saucers. I don't know. I have no idea.
There's abductions and all that other kind of
stuff. Yeah, so the interesting thing about the abductions is there are two kinds, basically, okay? There are two basic kinds of abductions once you get into the modern era of abductions. Now, this is again, when you go back to the contactee period, okay, quote-unquote contactee, as opposed to abductee, because before you get into the modern period of people who are taken out of their beds or while they're camping and then all this weird medical crap is done to them by something that doesn't look human but is humanoid, grays, whatever.
Yeah.
That's the abductees. Before this, late 40s, early 50s, up into the 60s, you had what was called the contactee period. It was never violent or all the abductee stuff is against the will of the the person's terrified and blah blah blah. The contactee period is some Adamski looking hubcap thing comes down and lands, and this beautiful Nordic woman comes out and claims that she's from Venus, and then takes them to fly around and look at stuff or whatever. They have sex and then they come back. It's it's all contactee, right? They make these crazy claims and they cook pancakes for the guy or whatever. It's it's very strange, but they're not aliens. Or they are, if they are aliens, they're incredibly human-looking aliens.
Yeah.
Right? The more modern era of abductees has an interesting and lesser-known counterpart to it. So once the abductee period begins, you have this other thing called MILABs, which is military abduction. So a person who gets abducted by Greys or has experiences that they associate, or that where they are okay, aliens are abducting me and doing weird medical experiments on me. So they'll get abducted, and then a few nights later, there's another abduction, but the things that they see doing the abduction, and it's very similar, and there's weird medical crap or whatever, but it's military dudes. Right, so first the Greys come down and they do this very strange, very ethereal, very weird, all these very psychedelic type of thing happens to the person where they're kind of in and out of consciousness and blah blah blah. And then there's this very rough, very violent military abduction, and so the MILABs things is people have thought that the military is trying to figure out what the freaking Greys are doing with this person. The military wants to know why is this person being abducted, but they're keeping it secret. So they come down and abduct the guy, and then they're what did he do to you? And stab him with stuff, and where's that implant? Give me that. Now, I've also thought about the missing person stuff. If you do have this breakaway civilization, they're going to have a problem with genetics. Not that many people. I mean, yes, the thousands of people went down there or whatever, but they're spread out in these colonies, and maybe, who knows, if they're getting into weird tech, they have radioactive accidents, they're working on crap or whatever, who knows, but so there's this strange thing with people disappearing in the middle of nowhere. and there's a lot of Germans or people of German ancestry or stock that vanish. Like David Paulides has talked about this, about how there's this, like in his disappearance cases, not all of them that happen, you know, where people get lost and just whatever, but the 411 ones, he says there's a preponderance of people of German ancestry or people with massive technical know-how, or people who have are looking at interesting new physics, like torsion physics and spinning plasma. People who are looking at nanotechnology.
Yeah. If you want a glad, look at physics real hard.
So what I'm suggesting is that you could take this story, and again, this is a story. I'm not saying all this is fact. I'm telling you that I've looked at all these very disparate pieces of things, and I'm like, okay, what if this is a story? What if this is all connected?
Yeah.
You know, and even going so far as, again, with the whistleblower from the World Bank, that what if these breakaway civilizations are actually working? So remember that the German SS and other secret societies of World War II had this weird idea about inner Earth and strange ancient beings and the Aryan race.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, if they had all these ridiculous badass scientists and all this shit, they're not really on the world stage in terms of human rights organizations and all that, and they can be doing genetic experiments and all that kind of crazy crap.
Yeah, so I don't know how much, obviously it's difficult to, did they build a good society down there, a just one, what if what they decided to, after World War II, what if they were like, you know what, let's check out of this whole crazy madhouse. Let's build our own thing, and maybe it's a just one. Maybe it's good, and they're just having nothing to do with us because they're like, the world's freaking gone nuts, right? Or maybe it's Auschwitz all over, but underneath the ice cap. Who knows, right? Who knows what they're doing?
We need to shoot it with lasers. Just melt massive holes in it.
Yeah.
We need to get a big space laser and just float the satellite right over the South Pole and just...
Yeah. On the other hand, you do have this this strange thing going on, and I don't want to dive into politics, but politics comes into this because it's global politics. There's this whole there's this strange global political push for that is that looks like it's trying to weaken the United States in a lot of ways, like open borders. Right? Mm-hmm. There's the whole Cloward Piven thing. There's very socialists, whatever you might think of socialism, there are obviously very bad forms of it, and there are bad forms of socialism trying to get hold in places around the world, okay?
Yeah.
Now, I don't have anything against society working together, but I do have something against the government having all the power to force everybody to work together the way they want them to work together. That's a big problem for me. And socialism usually turns into that in some way or another. Even if it's quote-unquote benevolent socialism, like you have in some European countries a quote-unquote benevolent socialism, but it's on the global stage, this is a bad idea, right? You have massively wealthy German people trying to undermine United States politics in a lot of ways. It's very strange, you know. There are even when you look at the German ancestry Jews are doing the same thing. It's if these are the people that fled Nazi Germany, okay, but maintain some of these ideological views and are now operating from a position of strength and secrecy, you know, and then you have this testimony from this woman saying that longheads in some cases are these weird not alien but humanoid longheads are running
different
World Bank stuff and doing strange things in world politics, right? She says that they had this powerful civilization and they fell, but now they're cooperating with some humans and some people know about them or whatever. Now you that all connects to this.
And they want to remain secret.
Right. So that's the rabbit hole that I wanted to take you guys down in.
So basically they're waiting for the right moment. Okay, because basically what you're saying, the reason why you're bringing up the political situation is that until we are significantly weakened as a superpower, they have to remain
Yeah.
Like,
They may be trying to renegotiate the deal.
Do that.
yeah.
Or not actually renegotiate the deal, but like, I don't know. Like, if they're nationalists and this is some effort. Okay, there's a book that was written called The Fourth Reich, okay, that talks about this, and like, I'm not promoting that book, but what I'm pointing to is that there are politics involved in this. If it is true, it is inevitable that there are global politics involved in any breakaway civilization. Because, okay, a breakaway civilization is not going to not deal with nations.
Yeah.
Okay? By nature, they're going to need resources. And being in hiding means they can't just go out and start mining everything. Now think about things like just weird, strange, like disparate stories, like the fact that all these World War II vessels that are full of metal and everything vanish off the bottom of the sea. You remember that story? The famous graveyard where the Brits would go out there once a year and hold this big ceremony over top of all these huge warships that like Japanese and German and British and American ships that all sank to the bottom. There's this massive metal graveyard of them miles beneath the ocean. They would go out there once a year and hold this ceremony. And one year they went out there and they were all gone. They're just not there anymore.
No kidding.
Yeah.
I didn't.
Somebody is snaking resources. Like, somebody needs resources. They need metals, right? And then, so that story comes out, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, what the actual F? Why isn't anybody freaking out about this? And the governments are like, oh yeah, this happened. Go on about their business. I'm like, wait a minute. You can't just like blow this off. This whole, like, all these ships that are just enormous amounts of metal they were never like they took the time once a year to go have this ceremony, which meant that it meant a lot to them, but it was too difficult for them to bring them up and really give them the honors, you know, like put them in museums or like, you know, whatever. No, they went out there because they were too deep and it was too cost prohibitive to do it. And somebody went there and got all of it within the space of a year with no one knowing about it.
That's crazy.
Or they did know about it and were letting it happen.
Yeah. So back to the more recent thing where they were going to drill down to the lake and then NASA's suddenly just like,
Yeah.
environmentalism.
They were going to drill down to the Lake Vostok and then they detected the magnetic anomaly and suddenly NASA becomes environmentalists.
So, but they should have already known, right?
I don't know. They may, like, if I was the breakaway civilization, I would not want the actual locations of my under ice bases to be known. And what better place, you know, okay.
Do that.
If there is an actual lake down there, why is it there? How is it still not frozen? Well, if there's a vent there keeping everything warm, then there's probably a big cavern above the lake.
Yeah.
So that would be a good place for a base. And remember that the magnetic anomaly was on one end of this. The lake is this long, narrow thing, and the magnetic anomaly is at one extreme end of it. So it could be the installation, or it could be an ancient. Who knows?
Yeah.
It could be the remnants of one of the ships the Martians brought over here. I don't know what it is, but it's fascinating that NASA suddenly were like, oh, well, you know, environmentalism, blah, 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 blah. Like, we can't possibly destroy that ecosystem that we don't even know is there.
I could not do that.
That seems ridiculous. Like,
Right, and the Russians are like, what ecosystem? It's underneath all this ice. And they start drilling down there, and then their scientists vanish for 2 weeks. Then they're returned, and they say nothing, and the whole story disappears.
so is this tied to all the observatories shutting down?
I don't know. But how about this? Like,
I'm getting real conspiracy, but we got to take a break.
oh yeah.
Hold on. Hold on. One more break.
I cannot do that.
And with half our pyramids tied behind our backs, just to make it nice. Brothers of the Serpent podcast. Final segment of the final hour. What was the point you were going to make? How about what?
How about okay, so there's this thing called the Antarctic Supply something or other. It's basically a deal that the United States government makes so all the bases that we have down there, the scientific bases, blah blah blah. The United States government contracts with somebody to supply them, and Lockheed Martin has the contract right now, and they are exclusively a defense contractor that builds weapons. So I don't think that they're interested in like the migrating habits of penguins or you know, like what whales are doing and stuff down in the Arctic, Antarctic. So why does Lockheed Martin, a defense contractor, have all of the freaking, like, they supply everything. So they bring all the technicians down there and they fly in all their equipment and blah, blah, blah. And they're a defense contractor. They're there for weapons and blah, blah, blah. So if the United States does have some kind of weird deal with these German, or this breakaway civilization that used to be, that had its origin as German colonies or something like that, and we're sharing tech and resources with them, this is a perfect cover. Yeah. Right? The other interesting thing that has happened, and this happened with Raytheon first, and then later on when Lockheed Martin got it, like their technicians would go down and they would be doing stuff, whatever they're doing down there, and then they would get ill, they would get sick. They kept getting very sick and nobody could figure out, and they couldn't handle it. They couldn't solve it themselves, and so then another defense contractor that was
they kept having to bring like emergency evacuations in the middle of the winter.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know what that is, but there is some speculation that there's obviously multiple ways you could go with that. Like if there's cooperation with this breakaway civilization maybe they're trying to dig into these ancient ruins, or even if they're longhead alien, whatever, non-terrestrial or something like that, and they're getting into stuff they don't understand, and it's making them ill, right? I don't know. There's just the idea of like
or the illness was a ploy, really, to get stuff out of there or bring more stuff or whatever.
Right. Yeah, it was a big. It's a cover.
Yeah, just a cover for whatever they had to do at the moment.
Right. Yeah, and then there was, I don't remember the details right now, but there have been strange incidents of scientists just getting poisoned and dying in the installations we have down there. You know, or just dying and nobody can understand.
That's weird too, because down there, like, bacteria is not going to be kicking ass, you know? Like, you're not going to be running into like the common cold or whatever. It's going to be extremely rare in a place where everything's frozen all the time and there's not very many people.
Unless there's like very warm places beneath there or there is some kind of ecosystem. And, but again, that's not the, you know, like what you're saying is basically like, why are people getting ill from bacteria in a frozen wasteland?
Yeah.
Well, they could be getting ill from bacteria that's millions of years old if they're digging down into something that's
exactly where
warm.
It's living, where it's warm.
Yeah. Super viruses coming out of there, or it could be, who knows, you know, I don't know, but there's enough weird shit happening with Antarctica, like that whole thing you were looking at on Google Earth that we've talked about before on the show, the strange base with the runway, and then there's this like what is it, 300 something mile long crawler track that goes to nowhere.
Yeah. It's crazy. And it shows up in 2001.
Yeah.
Like, you go back through the history, and before 2001, it's not there. And then 2001, bam, the track's there, and it's still there.
Yeah.
Like, the most modern photo still shows that track, clearly.
300-mile long crawler road that goes perfectly straight across the
pretty much. I mean, there's a few very slight turns, but the whole thing is basically a straight line. 300 miles long. 330 something.
From some weird looking, like, who knows what it is. It's impossible to tell. It has some towers around it and like communications towers or whatever, and it's got a big runway. And then this road just goes for 300 miles and ends on nothing.
Yeah.
And there's nothing there.
There's just a little disturbed patch, right? Where it's like, what is that? And it's not, it's in the middle. Like, it's not near the coast.
Right.
So
I would be interested I would love to overlay like the subglacial terrain and see where that road is going to, you know? Like,
wherever it goes, there's like stuff protruding from the surface.
Yeah.
Like, you know, there's like this tiny
mountaintops.
There's this tiny little patch where there's just like junk like sticking out of the ice.
Yeah, who knows? So the other interesting thing that Admiral Byrd said. Now there's a journal that was published posthumously. So people say it's a hoax. Other people say it's not. I have no way of knowing which is which. So I'm going to just ignore that for now. But one thing he said while he was still alive after Operation High Jump was that if, I can't remember if I said this on this show or not, but I wanted to make sure I did. If there was another war that the United States would have to contend with, basically with military forces, flights coming from the poles, from the North or South Pole. Now, like, when people have looked at this statement, they're like, okay, so he could be talking about the USSR because they could fly over the polar regions to come into the United States, and that's obvious. South Pole? Who's going to be flying from the South Pole? There's no Penguin Air Force as far as we know. But he definitely said the polar regions, the North and South Pole, and he had just come back from Antarctica when he's talking about this.
Yeah.
So who is he talking about that's going to be, if there's another world war, and this is, again, remember, this is like, Europe is still devastated, and Russia doesn't have any serious tech at this point. Who is he talking about that's going to be flying in, is going to be a serious threat to the United States from Antarctica?
Yeah.
So now if you look at his posthumous journals, there's all this...
Posthumous.
Post-posthumous. His journal, his posthumously posted journals. There's very strange stuff in there, and I don't know what to think of it. That like, while he was gone for those 3 hours, that he encountered these Earth beings who were non-human, but not extraterrestrials either, who lived, or at least claimed to live, somewhere beneath the surface. It's not clear if they are under Antarctica or if they're just subsurface beings, inner Earth type things. I think he called them the Aryanites or something like that. So this is the idea where you have the whole Aryan thing, right? This is an ancient civilization of hominids that are Earth beings who have survived the cataclysms that their civilization went through by going underground, and they have remained there. Okay, and so that's another breakaway civilization in a sense, right? And they, according to these journals, okay, Byrd never said anything like this while he was alive, but according to these journals, if they were actually his, they complained to him about the whole nuclear thing. So this is where you have the beginning of and there is a whole bunch of stuff with the contactee period where these Nordics and other ascended beings or whatever, these humanoids, were complaining to whoever they met about the whole nuclear deal. They didn't like us blowing up giant nuclear bombs. They were constantly warning us not to do this. And this trend has kind of continued in an interesting way. You get out of the contactee period and more into the modern UFO abductee period or whatever, but U.S. military bases, and not just in the United States, but also around the world, like Rendlesham being a famous one. Rendlesham is a base in the UK, a United States base in the UK, where these things come down and shut off all of our nuclear stuff and then leave, right? It's like they're testing. Are we still more powerful than them? Can we still affect their tech, right? And there's enough reports of this by actual military people who are just grunts, or people who are even like high in the chain of command, like the guy who was in charge of Rendlesham Base, was like, okay, we saw these crazy UFO things going around in the woods, and they were shutting off power systems and affecting the base in a big way. And there are other places in the United States, missile silos and everything like that. And this has happened on Hawaii, too, where these things come down, they hover over the base, they mess with the nuclear weapons that are beneath the surface, and then they leave. Like, it's, again, like the flyover Washington, D.C., these are signals. Like, you see these signals. Like, somebody has done something that has pissed off this third-party, unknown, secret power, who then shows up, doesn't kill anybody or hurt anybody, but says, like, we can still do whatever we want to you. Don't F with us, and then they leave. Yeah. And so then there's...
So it's like all this stuff in the political situation where they're like, we need to get rid of nukes.
Yeah.
we're all gonna do this, right, guys? Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
It's a
they're really,
denuclearization.
really
yeah.
they're trying to appease whatever this other power is by saying, yeah, we're all trying to get rid of them.
Right. And I'm sure that the
Put
other,
them in the other bunker, okay?
and if the other power is just, again, like, let's just not think about aliens or inner Earth beings or whatever. Let's just say that these are humans of a breakaway civilization that started sometime in the World War I, II era and really got going after World War II because they got a huge infusion of Germans that were fleeing and German scientists, whatever. These people will understand the United States is like, okay, there's this strange, delicate balance of power here. They're not going to demand that the United States gets rid of all of its nukes because they know at this point you can't do that, right? There's the whole MAD thing. MAD works. Mutual assured destruction, right?
Yeah.
There are people out there who are freaking crazy, and the only reason they don't try to bomb us with nukes is because they know they will get destroyed with nukes, right?
Yeah.
But there is this, like, sort of interesting thing to not let anybody else get nukes, right? Now, that also makes sense without having a breakaway civilization involved. But all the weird chicanery that goes on with that, you can, if you suddenly take a step back and say, wait, if there's this like unknown hidden third party in this, things begin to make more sense. And a certain, like, the way that certain heads of state act, you're like, okay,
Yeah.
now there's more information here. You know. Now, again, all this is speculation and conjecture, and you can obviously plug anything you want into the story with speculation and conjecture. So, again, I'm just saying, like, these are very disparate, strange facts that I'm trying to put together in a single narrative, which is a weakness of humans. Like, we want a single narrative. I want the freaking story to make sense, right?
Yeah.
So, maybe it doesn't make sense. I'll fully admit that, but this is an alternative view. Like, in other words, what I'm saying is we know the story where these people don't exist. I'm talking about the one where they do. We all fucking know that story. So don't, like, respond to this podcast going, oh my god, no, this is because of the... Like, we know that. Okay?
Dude, there's one thing I thought of earlier today when we were talking, when you were telling me you were looking into Antarctica.
Okay.
I, without knowing what you were going to be talking about, imagined, like, massive caverns underneath the ice where it was melted, and I was, like, thinking about taking a submarine in there. I'm serious.
Holy crap.
And, like, I can't think of a more freaky prospect than to get inside a submarine, this tiny little freaking metal tube, and go way down under the ocean. Number one, that's like already, slightly claustrophobic, but then you're gonna drive it into a waterway under
a maze of
4
ice.
miles of ice. And it's like you don't have windows, you're just like hidden just in here, and it's pitch black. And I was just imagining, like, spending weeks in this thing where are we lost in this freaking underwater cave? In this tube? Dude, that would be quite an adventure, and it would be freaky.
And then
as
you
hell.
surface in this pitch black, gigantic thermal vent cavern. You get out, and there's, like, hundreds of 8-foot tall reptilians standing.
That would be badass. Like, that would just make the trip totally worth it. You get out, and there's, like, this massive ancient city that's, like, half melted.
Yeah. The reptilians kill all of your Nazis,
half covered
but
in
keep all
ice.
the nationalists.
But the prospect of, like, we're just gonna go into this hole, like, we're gonna go down deep enough into the ocean where we're underneath any ice and just cruise in there for hundreds and hundreds of miles. And then find a riverway and then just, like, turn up that and just go that way for however many hundreds of miles. And then it's like exploring a cave. Like, if the smaller the tunnel gets, and the longer you go, the more you start to think, I can't turn around. And I haven't been able to turn around for a long time. If I keep going, maybe there will be an opening where I can turn around, right? But maybe there
maybe
won't.
not.
And so
you might
to,
just keep getting smaller and
that's
smaller
right.
and smaller.
And you have to decide, like, push on or freak out and go backwards, right? And then as soon as you have to, it's like deciding to go backwards is even more freaky. You know, it's like that's when you really start freaking out because you gotta, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's what I was imagining. Like, but that would be.
And I'm sure they lost some.
Yeah.
I mean, that magnetic anomaly might be what it is. It could very well not be an ancient alien city or like a breakaway civilization city. It could just be a German submarine.
That's all it would take to make an anomaly there.
Yeah, a magnetic anomaly is just a bunch of metal.
A big chunk of metal.
Yeah. That may be wrong because it may be too big. I don't know the size of it. I don't know how big it is, but a magnetic anomaly. This is how they found out that all those ships on the sea bottom were gone. There was no magnetic anomaly down there anymore. You know, you use a magnetometer and you're like, well, where's all that metal? It's gone. Right. So the claims that people made were like, oh, well, you know, the ocean probably just pushed dunes of sand. No, they would have found it because it was the magnets looking for metal down there that said the ships are gone. Right. So the magnetic anomaly in Lake Vostok it might be just a U-boat, a big one.
Yeah.
I don't know the size of the magnetic anomaly, so I can't.
It could be
say
the
that for
whole
sure.
fleet.
It could be a bunch, yeah.
Where they're, in
Yeah.
their harbor.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Is like, it could be a crashed one. You know, it could be as simple as like this is a 1940s or a secret German submarine that is just laying on the bottom there, and the reason why NASA suddenly backed out is because, you know, there's something going on with the whole like, okay, this is not ours. You know, I don't know.
Wasn't there like billions and billions of dollars worth of gold and stuff that just vanished after World War II?
All the art. There was huge art. There was an entire room made of amber that no one's ever found. Look up the amber room sometime, guys. It is a very fascinating. How do you steal a room, right? First of all, only the Germans are like, we're going to steal this room. I like this room. I'm going to take it.
We're going to steal the moon.
Despicable Nazi. This room is made of amber. I think I shall take this.
So yeah, like all these, you know, the whole longhead thing. That woman that was talking about the longheads being in charge of all these, like the World Bank stuff. Like they have tons of resources.
Yeah.
And they're using stuff to manipulate
the
financial situation
of the globe.
And of course they have like other means of doing that too, just like weird.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things about one of the ideas, I should say, about the whole, like, this breakaway civilization of nationalists, whoever they are, is that once they didn't give up the idea of the Reich. Okay, they're nationalists. They still want Germany to, or they may not attach it to land anymore. They still want this power. And once they understood that the Nazis had failed in a military takeover and establishing this Reich with military power, one of the ideas is that these breakaway people decided to do it through economic power.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the only difficult thing about it to me is it just seems like how would we be making any kind of deal with them where like we're somehow benefiting? I mean, I guess unless we have gotten a bunch of technology from them, but we're just keeping all of it top secret. So there's like like you were saying,
not all of it.
There would be a secret space whole mission and whatever. Because if they had this alternative form technology for flight, you know, that would just change everything.
Right.
It's a huge game changer.
Right. And they may not want the world to change like that.
Right. Does it make sense that like a superpower would just be cool with that? Part of the deal, you know what I mean?
I don't know.
That's what I'm talking about.
That's the same question that people ask about, like, well, why would there be this interest in like debunking any kind of alternative, like actual power? Let's just go with power and not flight, right? Why is there this interest in like getting rid of it? You know, if you're not, you know, like people who claim that like the oil companies they buy up all the alternative power possibilities and then they just like suppress them, right? Yeah. Like, why would they do that? Like, why wouldn't they just
use it.
use it.
Yeah.
Like digging up oil and refining it costs a shitload of money and a lot of resources.
And you're competing with a bunch of other people that are doing it.
Everybody knows about oil. Like, what if we could, like, Exxon could just be the only guy that has, like, flying saucers, right?
Yeah.
Like, why would we
You'd
do
be
this?
way more rich.
Again, you have... This begins to make more sense if there's a third party involved demanding this. Right?
Obviously, they don't care about global warming, man.
No, they don't. They're underneath the ice.
They're like, we want the ice gone.
Well, it's their cover now, too.
But once the ice is gone, then all the major cities are flooded, and then
Yeah.
they'll be in charge.
Yeah.
They'll be living on mountains.
Fiat in charge. Yeah, and then again, you have this. I don't know. Like, there may be a fourth party. Like some of this rabbit hole implies the idea that there's a fourth party. These longheads.
Yeah.
The third party is the breakaway. The fourth party, and maybe the fifth party, like if they're the longheads, but then there's these inner Earth people who are not the longheads. I don't know. If you look at the ancient text, they claim that there was not just one group of Anunnaki. There were the Nephilim, the Nephas, who were not Anunnaki. They were something else. They were some kind of breeding program deal. You know, there were multiple factions. You had the Igigi, the Sumerian word for like they were gods, but they were not the council gods. The Igigi, IG, the Watchers, right? And then there's this obvious thing in the Book of Enoch and other things where there's fighting factions between them, and they don't all seem to be the same. So like, it's not really clear what's happening here. But there may be multiple parties, not just a third, but a fourth, fifth,
Cannot do
sixth.
that.
Yeah.
And the story may be very, very long.
And a lot of those things that were flying around in the NASA videos in space did not look like they were made of metal. Right. They look like life forms.
Yeah, that may be the 12th party.
The little horseshoe crabs like cruising around up there.
Yeah, the space bacteria.
Horseshoe jellyfish.
Yeah. Yeah, who knows? But I think that's all I'm going to say about that. We've got...
I think we need to... Man. Fascinated by Antarctica, though. We, like... It seems like, I guess, in the world of science, there's like this interest in Antarctica, but there's, in large part, it's just a bunch of ice, right? You know, it's like, I'm just like, why aren't we doing way more shit down there than we're doing?
Yeah.
I've always wondered that. Like on Google Earth, you're cruising around and it's just nothing. And there's a couple of places that you can find where it's like, oh, okay, they put a weather station up there.
Why hasn't anybody else tried to go underneath it?
Yeah.
That seems
Maybe they
obvious
have,
to me.
right? I don't know.
Well, I mean, I like... Everybody's building bases on top of it, scientific bases, and there's this whole, like, agreement that nobody's going to try to blow anybody up down there.
Yeah. Why aren't there huge mountains of snow and ice that were dug up? Like, why don't we send, Vulcan Materials or Martin Marietta down there?
Why aren't they looking for resources?
It's like wherever they
Cannot do that.
quarry here, they build mountains.
Right.
You don't see any mountains, any man-made mountains down there where they're just like taking all this equipment and just excavating and just going down and down and down into the ice.
Right. Maybe you could answer that by either melting it instead of stacking it up somewhere else, but I don't know. Like, I don't know how that works. The glacial ice is a totally different...
Where's all the equipment
Yeah.
on the surface? Like, it's just like...
Well, we know that the United States has gotten really, really good, really good. NORAD is completely in a mountain. It's totally, like, you can't see it. It's an enormous endeavor. They built this gigantic... And who knows how much they've been expanding it since they initially built it. But all it is a freaking door in a mountainside. Like, you can't even see it from space.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So, like, I don't know. They may have found caverns in that mountain or knew that they were there, and that's where they're putting material, like, so that they're not constantly shoveling it outside.
Yeah.
There's also, they have boring machines. They're very boring to talk about.
Yeah.
And this is a tangent, but speaking about boring machines, there was a story that's been bugging me. I've been thinking about it recently. It was years ago, not many years ago, but some years ago. I can't remember exactly when it was, 2012, 2013, something like that. Maybe around there. But they were digging a tunnel, and it was in Seattle. They're basically doing this. they were digging a tunnel underwater, kind of like one of the New York tunnels where it goes under the bay and up into the city. They're doing something like that, and they ran into this thing. So they have this gigantic boring machine that everybody gets in and they pilot it. You just sit in there and you drive it, and it's drilling through the rock beneath the water. And then they ran into something that stopped the machine cold. And you can't just like get out of the machine and be like, what is that thing in front of my machine? You can't do that.
The machine is the hole.
Right. And I remember the story, and the people involved were calling it the object, capital T, capital O. And they didn't know what it was, or they were claiming not to know what it was, but it stopped this thing that is capable of boring through solid rock, stopped it cold. And I've never seen a follow-up story on that. What is the object that they ran into? And did they ever finish the tunnel? Does it have a weird jag in it where it goes around the object? You know? Who knows? I don't know. That's sort of a side tangent. I've been wanting to look into that recently, and I've just reminded myself, because I'm going to listen to this podcast tomorrow, and I'll remember to look into that story. All right, so you have anything else to say? I'm done with the story, so...
I just want to know how many pyramids are down there. No, I don't. I don't know. What you brought it up today, and so I just started freaking watching a bunch of videos and reading news articles.
Yeah.
But
so
it's all shrouded in mystery, and there's so many freaking conspiracy theories about everything
right
involved.
And
because the nature of the activity there is strange. Like,
right.
Whatever we've been doing there is strange. So that's...
Well, and it's also what did you call it? If you don't want anybody to find your secret information, you flood the world with, like, bullshit.
Yeah.
Right? This is why there's millions of Sumerian tablets that are about selling goats.
That's right.
Right? Yeah. The same thing looks like it's happening here. Remember I said that these people are experts in disinformation, and like if there's some kind of secret deal that involved the United States intelligence agencies and the military or whatever, and so there have been like whistleblowers across the decades who have come out and just put out all this. Like right now, Tom DeLonge looks like a prime candidate. Like in his book, he talks about the I'm glad you reminded me of this. He talks about the Antarctica bases, quote-unquote bases, that the quote-unquote Nazis made. It wasn't Nazis, and they weren't bases. They were colonies. But he claims they all failed in his book, which is like, to me, and nothing against Tom DeLonge. I don't have anything against him, and I'm not saying that he's doing this on purpose. But to me, he looks like a classic... he is a classic, like, a person who has been chosen for the dissemination of disinformation. He's very popular, you know, with young people, blah, blah, blah. He has an interest in UFOs. He's claiming to have the inside scoop from secret government people, blah, 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 blah. And he puts out all this stuff, and you know, and I'm like, okay, dude, like, you look like the classic disinformation guy, the unaware disinformation guy. You have gotten a bunch of actual documents from actual government people who are actually secret, but they're doing this on purpose.
Yeah, I get you.
They're trying to put they're putting paid to all the real information by putting this stuff out there and having a bunch of people like look in the wrong direction through your stuff. It's not his fault, probably. Okay. Yeah. But I guess the last thing I want to say is I thought of this and I just remembered it. The idea of the pole shift, the shifting. The crustal shift
displacement.
and yeah. When North America was covered in the ice sheet, like the explanation for that, and with Siberia being a temperate zone, is that the North Pole was moved from where it is now. That's the best explanation of that. Like Siberia, there's mammoths eating flowering plants because it was temperate there for some reason. It's a very strange thing now because Siberia is in an Arctic Circle, right?
Yeah.
But we know that there were mammoths eating flowers there that don't grow in the Arctic Circle at the time. So if you look at that and you figure out, so where was the North Pole? And if you put it kind of the Hudson Bay area, middle of the ice sheet, okay, and then you look at where the South Pole was, Australia was mostly in the Antarctic pole. And what's interesting is that the Watcher had to leave, by the way, but Watcher and I were looking a couple of years ago. We were looking at Google Earth, going over some of the desolate areas of Australia, and there are these long striations in the stone that at the time I was like thinking, are these? They can't be dunes. They're not like they're not sand dunes. They don't look like that. because they're long, continuous lines, right? But they're very sinuous and they go up and down. And I'm like, so I'm looking at this stuff the other day and I realized, okay, wait, Australia would have been that's ice cuts. That does make sense if you think of it as glacial action, but nobody associates glaciers with Australia. So I was like, not thinking about ice at the time. But now that I'm thinking back at it, like, those could be ice cuts. Okay, so Australia moves out of the Antarctic zone, and Antarctica, the continent of Antarctica now, moves into it. And this also explains all the ancient maps that have these periods, right? Like the Piri Reis one shows like the coastline, but the interior is full of ice. But there are other ones, the Orontius Phineas and some other Mercator maps or whatever, that come from more ancient source maps that show interior rivers and hills and forests. And again, they found forests, frozen, petrified, in Antarctica, right? They found whole forests, right?
Dude, it'd be crazy if like all the trees are still standing up and there's like all the
right, everything still is all flat frozen.
Yeah, but it just got frozen and covered in ice.
And if it all melts, the trees will keep growing and they'll be fine. Right? It's all in stasis.
If it all melts, there's just like a stone forest.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think back to the idea of the fallen being imprisoned beneath the earth in a desolate place, a desert. The Antarctic is one of the most arid places on the planet. It's a desert.
Yeah.
And what happened? Solomon was supposed to find the Shamir in a giant ancient temple beneath a desert. What if it was that desert?
Yeah. That's what they found. They went in there and they found the Shamir, and they've just been kicking ass ever since.
Right. All right.
Oh, that's cool.
Stand down or die.
I'm done. You do all the outros. I'm tired. I'm done.
All right, thanks everybody. Get your asses back to work, Adamu. High one. Snakes.